Hi, today we're going to be looking at some of the Egyptian secular literature, or at least as secular as Egyptian literature got. Starting with in your book, volume A, um, page 54, 55, The Tale of Sinaway. Um, it's unknown whether this is something that actually happened or not, if it's fiction. I frankly don't care because either way it makes the same point. Um, Sinaway is a servant of the queen, um, and about line 11, regnal year 30, month 3 of the inundation season, day 7. Now that's the way the ancients dated things. You know, they didn't have our BC and AD. That's obviously a Christian system of dating years, right? Things were dated in year so and so of the reign of King such and such. Um, the third month of the inundation, the annual flooding of the Nile, the day 7 of that month. Now, what happens on that day? The god ascended to his horizon. The dual kings, king of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, Sotepibre, mounted to heaven and was united with the sun, the divine flesh mingling with its creator. The residence, the king's palace, was in silence. Hearts were in mourning. The great portal, the formal doorway, was shut. The entourage was bowed down. The patricians were in grief. It's a poetic way of saying the king died. In Egyptian mythology, um, the king was the child of the sun god Horus. And he is ascended to be united with his father. Now, where was Sinaway? Line 22. He was sent out. He was with an expedition led by the crown prince, the king's eldest son, to Libya. What were they doing there? Line 25. Carrying off Libyan captives and all sorts of cattle without number. This is a raid. Capturing livestock and slaves. And I want to talk a little bit about slavery in the ancient world because when you think of slavery, you're going to think of slavery in America, which was not, which is different from slavery in the ancient world. All ancient societies that I know anything about had some form of slavery. Um, the first country I know of to abolish slavery was, believe it or not, Poland in the 1500s. Okay. Um, Denmark abolished it in 1801. Britain about the same time. You know, in America, we had to fight a civil war to abolish slavery. Um, Saudi Arabia abolished slavery in the 1960s. I was alive. Sudan has yet to abolish slavery. But slavery in the ancient world was different from slavery in America in one key respect. That is, that slavery was not, in the ancient world, was not based on what we would call race, skin color. You and I could not tell an Egyptian from a Libyan by looking at them. Now, in ancient times, you could probably tell the difference by the style of their clothing. But that's something different from their facial features, right? Well, as they're coming back to Egypt with slaves and cattle, messengers arrive and tell the prince what has happened. Top of page 56. On the road, the messengers found him. They reached him at nightfall. Not a moment did he wait. The falcon, Horus, flew off with his followers without informing his expedition. Okay. Now, would you normally set out if you're traveling either on foot or perhaps on horseback? Maybe riding in a chariot? I think this is New Kingdom. No, Middle Kingdom. I don't know if the Egyptians even had the wheel yet. I think it was only in the New Kingdom that they were introduced to the wheel. So you're on foot or on horseback, traveling through the desert where there are no roads. You gonna leave at night? At nightfall? Okay, he's hustling back to the palace to claim the throne before somebody else does. This is a dangerous time. This is when coups can happen. When one of his half brothers, his father uh, doubtless has multiple wives, um, with backing from influential court members, may try to seize the throne. So he immediately hustles back. And Sinue overhears this, and he's shocked. Line about 43. My heart staggered, my arms spread out, trembling fell on every limb. And he takes off, traveling in a roundabout way. He doesn't go back to the capital where you would think he would go. He takes off on a roundabout way, heading off, escaping Egypt, off to the northeast through the Sinai, until he ultimately winds up somewhere in the region of Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel. In this translation, he describes the people he sees there as Syrians, wretched Asiatics. And one of their leaders, line 79, who had been in Egypt once, recognized him. The story that we're going to see in Genesis, where Joseph brothers come in a time of drought and famine to buy grain in Egypt, that was actually commonplace. People from that region would often, when the rains failed, because their crops depended on rain to water them, would come to Egypt where they didn't have to have rain, where it was the Nile flooding that supplied the water. Um, they take him in. Line 85, country gave me the country. I set out for Byblos, which is a city on the coast of what is today Lebanon. It's actually where our word Bible comes from, the name of that city. It's not clear exactly where Kadim is, but it's got to be somewhere in that general area. One of the leaders takes him in. Amun-Inshi, notice he has an Egyptian name. Amun, the sun god. In New Kingdom times, Egypt had a loose control over this area. And he wants to know what's happening in Egypt. And notice that Sinue says, I spoke in half-truths. You know, he doesn't tell the whole story. He tells about how the king died as he was coming back from Libya, and his heart failed. But he says, line 105, I've not been talked of, my face has not been spat upon, meaning he hasn't done anything wrong. He doesn't really know why he came here. And Amun-Inshi wants to know how Egypt is doing without the Pharaoh, and he said his son has taken his place. Page 58, lines about 115. He is a God who is peerless. He is a Lord of understanding, excellent of plans, effective of orders. He subjugates the countries. And he's been working as his father's co-regent. His father stayed within his palace. He, the son, reported to him what he had ordained was done. You know, he's been kind of carrying out his father's orders anyway. And notice how Egypt's dominance over its neighbors is part of this concept of Ma'at. Line about 126. He is vengeful, a smasher of foreheads. Close to him no one can stand. And the reference is one of the iconic images of Egyptian art. You'll see it in the PowerPoint on Egyptian religion, is the Pharaoh standing over his enemy with a mace, a club, in his hand to bash in his head. It's a kind of a symbol of conquest. In fact, at the bottom of the page, he says he conquers in the egg. I mean, from his youth, right? Page 59. Amun-Inshi not only takes him in, he gives him his eldest daughter as a wife. In traditional societies, marriages are arranged by the girl's dad. He chooses his son-in-law. He had me make my choice of his country. You know, he gets his pick of where in his father-in-law's territory he wants to live and make his home. And it's a good land. We don't even know if Ia is a real place, but he says there's figs in it and grapes. You know, it's a good, rich land, fruitful and all the different things they can grow there. You know, he's well provided for. He enjoys all the good things of life. Top of page 60. I spent many years there, and my children became heroes, each man subjugating his tribe. So he stays there for a long time, long enough for the children he has with his wife to grow to adulthood themselves. 20, 30 years. And he brags about how uh, he um, he was an effective commander of his father-in-law's army. You know, he's well off. He's a good ruler. But page 62, he prays. He prays for what? Lines about 265 to 270. Back in Egypt, top of page 63, the Pharaoh hears about what's happening to Sinaway, and he sends him a letter. Now, there was no post office in the ancient world. You wanted to send somebody a letter, you have to send somebody to deliver it. And so he sends a messenger with a decree, a letter from the king. Line 305. What does he want Sinaway to do? Royal decree to the follower Sinaway. Look, this decree of the king is brought to you to inform you that you're roving through countries, going from Kedem to Rechenu, country giving you to country. Was it the counsel of your own heart? What had you done that you should be acted against? You had not cursed that your speech should be punished. Now, cursing here does not mean cussing. It means to pronounce a curse against somebody of importance, the king. You've not spoken in the officials' council that your utterances should be opposed. You know, nobody's against you here. It was not in my heart against you. Return to Egypt, and you'll see the residence where you grew up. Kiss the earth at the great portal. Join the friends, for today, this is his reasoning, for today you've begun to be old. You've lost your virility. Have in mind the day of burial. And he describes the burial customs of the Egyptians. I gave you some of that in the PowerPoint on ancient Egypt. A funeral procession made for you on the day of joining the earth, with a mummy case of gold, a mask of lapis lazuli, a heaven over you, and you're placed in the hearse, and oxen dragging you, singers going on before you. The dance of the oblivious ones will be done at the mouth of your tomb chamber, the offering invocation recited for you, sacrifices made at the mouth of your offering chapel. In a proper Egyptian tomb. Your death will not happen in a foreign country. Asiatics will not lay you to rest. You'll not be put in a ram skin when your coffin is made. See, the people of the region where he's been living, which is basically the region of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, don't have the same beliefs about life after death that the Egyptians had. They'll just wrap you in a sheepskin and throw you in a cave, and that's that. Okay. For the Egyptians, it was important that the body be preserved. Otherwise, the soul will not recognize that the tomb is its home, and it will wander the earth. You can't have grandma wandering homeless when she dies. See, the Hebrews and their neighbors, their beliefs about life after death were based on what we're going to see from Mesopotamia. There is no life after death. And so they didn't have the same burial. You know, for an Egyptian to live on after death, the body has to be preserved. And there has to be some kind of offerings made to sustain the soul. Because it has to eat and drink. It needs all the stuff you need in this life. You know, you've heard the expression, you can't take it with you. Well, the Egyptians thought that not only can you take it with you, you have to. So basically, what he's saying is come back to Egypt, where we'll bury you properly, and you can enjoy the afterlife that we believe in. And notice what Sinue does. Page 66. He hands over his land to his chicks, his children. He leaves his wife and his kids, and he goes back to Egypt. Where he is received page 68. There's a ritual welcoming him back into the court. Page 69. I became clean shaven. Egyptians shave the whole body to avoid lice. And I think it says something about the Egyptians that he goes back to Egypt so he can be properly buried, leaving his wife of at least 20 years, you would have to think, and his kids behind, because they're not Egyptian. And whether this is something that's a true story or whether it's fiction, it really doesn't matter. It reflects how important these burial customs and their belief in life after death was for the ancient Egyptians. I gave you online the instruction of Amenemope. This is actually a source for chapter 23 of the Bible's book of Proverbs, and also Psalm 1, that reflects what's called wisdom literature. It's in the form of advice from a father to a son on this is how you ought to live. And really, this is what ma'at means in terms of morality. how you should live. Um, it talks about integrity, um, and particularly be careful how you treat um, those less fortunate than yourselves. Beware of stealing from a miserable man and of raging against a cripple. Be careful how you treat older people. Don't stretch out your hand to touch an old man or snip at the words of an elder. You need to conduct yourself with justice, with um, goodness. But a major theme in this is the contrast between the argumentative man or the hothead and what's called the silent man. The idea is that excessive passion, the person who's always upset about something, you ever known somebody like that? Disturbs the balance of Ma'at by the force of his his passion. And so, line about 45, the hot-headed man in the temple is like a tree grown indoors. Only for a moment does it put forth roots, but it winds up in the carpentry shop. The temperate man, the silent man, is like a tree grown in a sunlit field. It flourishes, it doubles its yield, it stands before its owner. Its fruit is something sweet, its shade is pleasant, and it reaches its end as a statue. You know, it it grows, it endures, it lasts. The hothead burns out. Talks about respecting, not robbing from the temples. God will get you for that. Um, Altering the surveyor's markers, to try to get a little land off of your neighbor. There are things, chapter 7, more important in life than money. One of them is integrity. Chapter 9, do not fraternize with the hot tempered man. Safeguard your tongue. Especially be careful how you talk to somebody who outranks you. A lot of the advice is based on prudence. You know, be careful how you act. What works in society, what doesn't. And I think they're on to something. A person who has who thinks they have a grievance, complaint. If you can stay calm and reasonable and say, hey, I think we have a problem here, that'll probably get you further than if you come storming in, yelling and screaming and, you know. The person who is overly aggressive kind of puts other people in a position where they have to defend themselves and doesn't get very far. Last thing I want to look at, beginning page 7071, are some of the Egyptian love poems. Um, and I want to point out first one thing in the introduction, that the lovers refer to each other as brother and sister. Now, don't take that literally. They're not brother and sister. Um, those are like baby. It's a term of endearment. And the your translator tries to identify who is speaking, the boy or the girl. The first one we have, um, the girl talks about being ready to trap birds with a snare in one hand, a cage in the other. What does trapping birds have to do with love? When we're dating, aren't we trying to catch somebody? The first to come takes my bait. Its fragrance comes from Punt, its claws full of balm. You know, the Egyptians sometimes caught birds by putting sticky substance called pitch on a tree branch, and the bird lands on it, of course, gets stuck. My heart desires you. Let us release it together. Um, does it refer to the balm or something else? I'm with you, I alone, to let you hear the sound of my call for my lovely myrrh anointed one. Is that one the bird or the guy? You're here with me as I set the snare. Going to the field is pleasant indeed for one who loves it. Who loves what? Who loves trapping birds? Making love? Bit of a double entendre. The second one, it's also the girl who's speaking about how pleasant it is to go to the river, and she wants to wade into the water in front of him, that I may show you my beauty in a tunic of finest royal linen. Now, what's going to happen to that dress when it gets wet? And you thought your generation invented the wet t shirt contest. His response My beloved's love is over there on the other side. The river surrounds my body. If the river is surrounding his body, he is, at least as the footnote points out in his imagination, stepped into the Nile to swim across it. The floodwaters are powerful in this season, and a crocodile waits on the sandbank. He's willing to run any risk to be with her. Yet I went down to the water to wade through the flood, my heart brave in the channel. I found the crocodile to be like a mouse, and the surface of the water like dry land to my feet. It is her love that makes me strong. She casts a water spell for me. The attraction is so strong that he's able to overcome all the obstacles to get to her. The next one, I wish I were her Nubian maid. So that he could be with her while she changes clothes, and bring her a bowl of mandragoras. It was, if you look at the footnote, it was thought to be an erotic, an aphrodisiac, make you fall in love, turn you on. And it was also an erotic symbol. Its long taproot, which resembled a certain part of the male body. He wishes he could be close to her, even to touch her clothes that touch her body. Now, notice something. I mean, obviously, this is fairly erotic, but notice that there's no description of what she looks like. That's left to the imagination. The poem focuses on the feelings that are aroused rather than on her body itself. Page 74, the girl passes by his house. He's standing in the house with his mother and brothers and sisters. And of course, he looks at her as she passes by. But I must exult alone. If only mother knew my heart, she would go inside for a while. O golden one, Hathor, the goddess of love, put that in her heart. Then I could hurry to my beloved and kiss him in front of everyone and not be ashamed because of anyone. The lovers here are quite young. And in a traditional society, you don't just go kiss somebody in front of everybody. I would be happy to have them see that you know me. She wishes that she could just go and kiss him in front of family and nobody be upset. In 7 whole days, he is lovesick. And what he needs to cure his sickness is her. Her coming, line 15, her coming in from outside is my amulet. An amulet is a magic charm. If I see her, I'll become healthy. If she but gives me a glance, my limbs will regain vigor. If she speaks, I'll grow strong. If I hug her, she'll drive illness from me. She's been gone for a whole week. You know, when you're in love with somebody, it's hard to be apart. Now, the last one I think is very interesting. And it's the girl speaking. Am I not here with you? Then why have you set your heart to leave? Why don't you embrace me? Has my deed come back upon me? See, what's the context for this? Well, I think it's like the morning after their first night together. If you seek to caress my thighs, is it because you're thinking of food that you would go away? Or because you're a slave to your belly? Is it because you care about clothes? Well, I have a bed sheet you can wrap around yourself. Is it because you're hungry that you would leave? Then take my breasts, that their gift may flow forth to you. Will you still love me tomorrow? As hopefully you've seen, the feelings of being in love haven't changed at all.